Were medieval Muslim world servants slaves, and is servitude effectively the same as slavery? Hey, welcome to the channel, Gate to Babylon, the gate to everything. Welcome, this is Ali. Today we're talking about slavery / servitude in Islam and the Muslim world. Like everything related to that topic, like what's up with it, what it is, its history, how did it go, clearing misconceptions, and everything all about that type of stuff on that line. This video is actually partially kind of a reply continuation. I don't know what to call it, but like it's a reply to Modern History TV, the video Were Medieval Peasants Slaves, and it is kind of a reply as well as take it from a different trajectory, and I just got inspired by the title and the work. The video is basically as close as to perfection as you could possibly get, in my opinion, and I like the channel. It is to compare and contrast to some capacity between medieval Europe and medieval Muslim world, to see the differences and the similarities and how did things work, to understand history more. So without further ado, let's get into it. To begin, just quickly, in medieval Europe, the church was against slavery from early on, talking about just around the time of the Viking Age, 8th, 9th century, in particular the western part of Europe around France. London as well, England, that area. That of course didn't stop slavery to happen, and it's casually you can find it there and there, but generally there was a lot of tension against it. During the medieval times and even before, most people live in villages and in towns. Well, in the Middle East, there's like really big cities and stuff, so that's a bit different there. The town's still considered to be really tiny in the Middle East, but in medieval Europe, western part, as it grows, towns are like what a city is in the Middle East to some extent, like in terms of compare and contrast. But most people lived in towns and villages. Not really that many would live in cities, and cities were started to grow in the western part of Europe. In the Middle East, you're talking about maximum 20%, perhaps certain areas 30% would live in cities, but usually 15% would live in cities, and the rest are living in villages and outside of cities. In Western Europe, that is even less, something on the line like 10%. So in medieval Europe, there's multiple types of people, but most people were peasants, and peasants is two types. There's servile, and there is freemen, the free ones. And our friend from Modern History TV in his video explains that really well. Generally, peasants weren't slaves. Now let's get to the main point: slavery / servitude in Islam. First, we need to be open-minded. Slavery in the English sense, because we're speaking English right now, according to the English dictionary, what exactly a slave is, what a slave, the word slave itself means exactly, is different from what the counterpart or kind of a counterpart of slavery in Arabic. Same time, a servant in Arabic is it's a bit different there when it comes to servant in English. They're quite really close, but slightly different. Most people today, when we talk about slavery, they think about the Atlantic trade, the triangular trade. So most people think about that at what is slavery is, referencing to the nearest point most famous part, to the closest to us from history, during the 18th century and the early 19th century of the 1800s, which kind of this American Civil War, the USA Civil War, was based on, but really it wasn't the main point. That type of slavery didn't exist in the Muslim world. Well, in practice, it didn't exist at all. But we're gonna come to that. In the main part of the Muslim world, it's generally like 99.99, it didn't exist. A note here, bear in mind that this is not saying that this type of slavery, similar to the Atlantic trade slavery, what typically slavery means for the people, for you viewing me, where you think generally what a slavery mean, that type of slavery, as I'm saying, it didn't exist in the Muslim world. It doesn't. I'm not saying that slavery didn't exist in all its different various forms and types in the Muslim world. That's not what I'm saying. But that specific type of slavery, of basically not differentiating between the slave and an animal, or even in some cases you treat the slave even worse than you treat even an animal, like a dog or even a pig. So please just bear in mind with me one by one. We're gonna get through this. Slavery, as of the traditional sense of understanding of modern world people, it didn't even exist in the Arab world, in the Arabian Peninsula, prior to Islam, even before Islam. Muslim worlds don't have slaves from the get-go. Slavery was completely abolished by Islam. However, they replaced slavery with servitude, which is a contract. Being a servant is totally and absolutely not even 1%, nor even less than a fraction of 1% similar as to be a slave. Servants are protected by the law, they have rights and everything, like all that type of stuff. As I said before, or I think I said, in Arabic we don't have the word slavery exactly. The closest to the word slavery there is in the Arabic language is abd, which is derived from the word abada. And abada is a verb, and this verb generally refers to the person who makes it softer. Basically, what I mean by softer is generally it's used for making a road, making the road useful and smooth, or making something easy. That's what the word slave in Arabic means, which is partial part of the meaning of what the word slave mean in English. However, the word slave in English focuses more on the ownership, and that the slave is basically like an animal or even less. In Islam, there is even rights to animals, and even animals you can't like hurt them and extra all that type of stuff. And Islam is among the first that I'm aware of, and actually the first that strongly and by the law protect the rights of animals and even insects. You cannot just randomly kill a beehive or ants. If you do that frequently, you literally can go to jail by the state. Servant in Arabic is khadim, and khadim is referring to someone that serves you. Pre-Islamic Arabia did definitely have slave, but not exactly that bad. What I mean is, you cannot just treat your slave whatever you want. You cannot just do whatever. In the same way in the Atlantic trade, and you must sustain their life and all that stuff. Whenever a slave gets a harsh punishment is where the slave is kind of needs it as like according to the standards of an entire area. And in most cases, even if it was a son or a daughter, would get the same punishment, perhaps less, but would still be punished. We're talking about like if a crime is done by the slave or something on the line like that, or a big mistake that it cannot be easily forgotten. If the owner does like some horrific stuff or unnecessary violence to the slave, the people will go against this particular owner because they themselves probably have slaves and they don't want slaves to get angry and get desperate and organize a revolt or any things of that type. They don't want the slave to actively go trying to kill their masters. That's one point. Second point, they want the slaves to work as efficient as possible. Third point, it affects the community and it affects the youngsters. Also, the slaves, they still regarded as human beings. The reason for that, because there wasn't exactly racism or something like that, because simply anyone can become a slave. That there's no color associated with slavery or anything like that, unlike misconceptions of today. Even free people can become slave if they are captured by gangs, or gangs is a modern word, kind of, so to speak, but like if they're captured by criminals, or if they're captured by a tribe, or an invasion force takes over, you can be a slave if you got captured. Also, you could buy yourself from slavery, and that's why the main reason the slave is still regarded to a great extent as a human being. Also, because it is obvious, is to a great extent, but not fully, because you lost your freedom, and that refers to you have been unlucky as well as you have been overpowered, and that the person that on you is more superior to you in sense of being more powerful than you, being richer than you, that he can suppress your freedom, not in the sense of superior to in race, or just superior as if person that owns you is divine or something. Slaves shared a point of view of respect to their master in many cases. Usually a slave too incapable of sustaining themselves if they become free from the get-go, and that's why you're superior. It's not exactly superior to you, but in a much higher position, and usually the ones that own slaves are ultra rich and powerful as well. That's slavery in pre-Islamic Arabia. Now, what about slavery in Islam? First, slavery in any form or shape, whether that's slavery or servitude, is banned against Muslims. What I mean by banned against Muslim is a non-Muslim within a Muslim power cannot enslave or even put in a servitude to a Muslim, and you're not a Muslim, as well as a Muslim cannot servitude a Muslim. So in many cases, if you are a servant or a slave, we're gonna come back to this slave slash servant point. But if you're a servant, you can easily win your freedom by just declaring yourself as a Muslim. If you convert yourself or revert, and it did happen in many cases that way. If you declare yourself being a Muslim, you instantly can win your freedom. However, it wasn't just as simple as that. Because many slaves actually, or servants, didn't want their freedom. We're gonna come back to this point too, but just one by one. So effectively, by the time of the 9th century, basically within the main Muslim power, in the caliphate, but only the first caliphate that's actually a caliphate, or the ones after a sultanate, even the Ottoman Empire. Okay. By the caliphate, a Muslim powerhouse that was there, 9th century, basically within the Abbasid time, at the end of the main power of the Abbasid influence, all Muslims, or the ones that declare themselves as Muslim or followers of Islam, have been completely, most of them, the majority, completely free. There is a lot of talk in Islam itself against slavery, regardless of Muslims or non-Muslims. However, it's more complicated than that. It's not easy to free all slaves, especially from the get-go. You cannot, just like in the West, make a legislation, make a little bit of signatures, and you just declare all slaves free, and then all slaves become free. It just wouldn't be like that. It's not like that. We're still in the history part. So then after that, most of the slaves, of course, as most Muslims are no longer slaves, most of the slaves are non-Muslims, which is majority Christians. So basically what left of the remaining slaves, the rest have been freed. Just within brackets, most of the Muslim world up to the 16th century is not really Muslims. It's led by Muslims, it's controlled by Muslims, and the Muslim power, the Muslim government, or Muslim military, and Muslim police, and Muslim leadership. But the inhabitants of the population is majority not Muslim, and specifically Egypt and Levant is a vast Christian majority up to the 1600s, which is the mid-17th century, even during the Ottoman Empire. But after that started to mass conversion, but it wasn't by power, it was the will of the people. Like during this time, up to that time, Levant and Egypt is 80 to 90% Christian and Jews, and the rest are Muslims. So Muslims in these two specific areas are not by any means the majority, but they're still the ones in power and in control and in command. That's why it is part of the Muslim world, but the population is not by any means majority Muslim up to that point. It happens later, not even fully yet part of the Arab world. It also that happens later. During the Crusades, the Crusaders sometimes even killed Christians because everybody just looked the same in the Middle East. Even today, it's really hard unless you ask somebody and the person answers you, honestly, you wouldn't know who's a Christian and who's a Jew or who's a Muslim. During Saladin times, Arab Christians of the Middle East, inhabitants, mostly Orthodox, Aramaic, as well as Unitarians, as well as Arisian Christians, have fought with, but majority Orthodox, and some Unitarians. Those were two of the biggest groups at the time. There's also the Aramaic, but a little bit in the north, not exactly in the... Anyway, most of the Christians, we got dragged there. Most of the a lot of Christians did fight with Saladin against the Crusaders, and even the Christians themselves at the time didn't want the Western Crusaders to be there, even though they are Christians. And for the Arab world, the Crusades weren't really Christianity versus Islam at the time. At the time, it was viewed as similar to colonialism, but not exactly. Like, it's basically like a foreign people coming to invade a particular land for whatever reason. They try to convince the population of specific people to go there to do that, and there was religious sentiments, but most of that is done by the Crusaders, and because of that, that's why even a lot of Christians in the Middle East, in the Levant and Egypt, fought with Saladin and the other Muslim powers prior to Saladin against the Crusaders from within and from outside. A lot of them also served as intelligence to Saladin. So specifically, we have a lot of information in that regard with Saladin. That's why I'm mentioning it. There is a lot of efforts in the Muslim world to reduce servants and generally, but these efforts were kind of stopped, so to speak, because there's constant fighting, and the way how warfare they're captured, if not ransomed, either they would be executed or they would be turned into slave/servants. We're gonna come back to that, slave/servants. Slavery in general, as I said, Islam completely bans that. But because of other reasons, because you cannot take completely the entire slave concept out, we're gonna explain that too, because of economic sense to it. There's an economic reason for it. But the being a slave, being owned by someone, no, because you're only the slave of God. So regardless whether you're Muslim or not, you cannot be a slave. You cannot be owned. You cannot your owner can do whatever. No. That's completely prohibited and banned for Muslims and non-Muslims. There was external factors that undermined the effort of gradually taking out servitude. There wasn't slavery, there was servitude. We're going to talk about servitude, what it is, as in a minute. But slavery was banned, and servitude, there was a lot of effort to gradually grind slowly, without disturbing the economy, without disturbing lives, without slowly take it out. But it was undermined by external factors such as warfare, such as the Mongols, such as, by warfare, they captured, and such as pirates. Pirates were a problem, and even in powers empire like China and in the Middle East, like the big caliphates, you cannot control everything 100%. Like, you cannot, even if you say this is prohibited or you cannot trade that, there's still this drug trade and all that shit that happens, even today, much less level than before, but still happen. All the pirates business was outlawed, and sometimes it is supported by certain powers, but that intelligent stuff, just in the same way how CIA operates, and it's by specific powers outside of the Middle East, or the main part of the Muslim influence of the Muslim world. Because of those external factors, servants are getting more servants enter than servants gets out of this of being servants, and that's why it continues. There's a lot of stuff that there is within Islam itself that tries to grind a little bit by a little bit to remove slavery in all its forms and shapes, including servitude. For instance, that's within Islam itself in the core, in the practice of extra. For instance, if you swear, if you say in the name of God, I would do that and that, and for some reason or because of something happens and you couldn't do it, the first thing you could do to remove that sin, it's not sin in sense of being a big deal, but if you, in order to remove that weight, you have the first option is if you could, and if you have a slave/servant, you have to free this person. That's just a simple example. And the thing is, there's a mechanism put in place that when a servant gets freed, there is income from the state, as well as a little bit of income from the master need to be given to the slave, and the state needs to take care of the slave until they have the full capacity to take care of themselves. You might ask why they use that for all slaves. Well, there's a lot of them, and you cannot /servants. It's mostly servants, not slaves. There's a whole lot of them, and you cannot just do that for everybody at the same time, nor for big sections at a time. We're talking about some occasion. It happens occasionally, but all the time, multiple centuries, it starts to reduce. But then within, when you reach just a little bit prior to the Crusaders era, that's where there's a lot of servants start to pour in, more than the servants, as I said before, gets out of servitude. Also, by the time after the 9th century, most of the power of the Abbasid Caliphate is demolished basically, and you see dynasties and sub-states started to emerge, and these are occupied with fighting each other politically and economically and in intelligence manner, and sometimes in warfare and skirmishes to some capacity, and they're occupied in more complicated things, and they don't actually fully implement Islam to begin with, nor did the Abbasid, but it was better than nothing, and it was to a great extent good, fine. So there wasn't focus anymore in that regard, and many more other stuff took the focus instead. There's many mechanism of freeing many stuff that if this happens, if that happen, if you do that, which is wrong, then you have the first option, the first condition is if you can to free a servant, and there's many other things. So as more people does these things, servants gets freed, as well as there's other stuff as well, but there's no time to go over them. There's also during the Umayyad Caliphate is the Umar Abdul Aziz, the Caliph Umar Abdul Aziz times, his reign of short 2 years where he implemented Islam fully and the economy grown really well, and the zakah money have been really high, as well as like the government has a lot of money left and started spending the money in multiple different things, in different levels. In the end, there's still a lot of money that they didn't know what to do with it, so they just put it in the storage. Basically, they stored it. But one of the couple final things they're spending money on is freeing non-free individuals, servants from being servants, and they did free hundreds of thousands of servants at a time. Also, you have one of the best stuff in Islam you can do is to free servants and to take care of that servant and to make him one of your family. That's one of the great things in Islam. So if somebody wants to make great things and have money, that's an option, which is an option even today, because there's still roughly like 27-30 million slaves around the world, and ironically there's more than 1 million inside of the United States, if not, I remember like most of them in the United States or something, but like there's still even today millions of slaves, so somebody can do that. For instance, I heard like in Africa you can free a slave with $50,000 or $70,000. Perhaps you need something on the line equal to that to give it to the slaves so they can sustain their life, which is like, billionaires and multimillionaires can do, which can be done. So where Islam stands on slavery, as I said, there isn't slavery exactly in the traditional sense as understood by the West. That doesn't exist, prohibited completely. You don't own the person. There's no slavery exactly, but there is servitude. And as I said in the beginning, a servant is given rights, is protected by the state, extra. However, what a servant is, a servant can be forced into this. It's a contract. Being a servant is a contract, and a free individual can put himself in a contract with a particular person that, like, ultra rich, to become a servant of that person. And as I said, most servants are like from war, like from outside of influence of a Muslim government, from a war, or from indirect illegal means. That's in terms of the ones forced into the servant contract. So servitude is a contract between two particular individuals, and the thing is, only the ultra rich in the Muslim world could have servants, because having a servant is really expensive, and that also limited the number of slaves in most times. Usually, sometimes the rich people are just ultra rich, so they get a lot of servants, but usually that helped in reducing the number of servants, because having a servant is literally like having an additional family member. It's to that extent. It's like an additional family member that's not exactly your family, like not blood related. Wouldn't be your brother. You have to pay for everything. You have to make sure they have everything and they are sustained. Like if your servant steals and then he got catched stealing by the state, the police or something, you will give the punishment, not the servant, because that's an indication of why will the servant steal, especially if it was really heavy or not ultra heavy. Of course there's detectives and extra, there's other stuff to it, but usually you are the one that gonna give a punishment, not the servant, and you cannot punish your servant extra. All that stuff, like they have rights, they have stuff, like it's expensive to have a servant, not like a slave where like you can like force them to work to maximum, you don't care about their health and whatever, and then if they die you just bring a new one. That's not how things works here. It's literally being a servant is like the guy, the servant of Batman in the Batman story. I forgot his name. Oh my god, like that guy. That's basically what a servant is, but instead of getting paid as a labor, would be paid by sustaining everything in your life. So basically, you don't pay the servant. However, if they get sick or whatever, their food, their education, extra will be provided by you for the servant. And only like when you have a servant, they have a particular skill that you want. So most servants are used for warfare, but they're used for security. They're used for specific jobs in palaces and extra like that. But usually servants are taught, educated by the person if they're not educated by default. But if you're not educated, you will be educated by the master. Of course, that gives prestige to the master. They can use it for many stuff, as well as, when a certain person tries to show off that their servants are this smart. The other person tries to raise how smart or how educated their servant is to show off the other servant, the other rich guy or the other person in the court or something like that, and there's a competition in that regard. But usually servants are extremely skilled in a particular field, and servant men are usually really good hunters or really good warriors. They can provide security to you, extra. And I want to emphasize that if a servant have a right to marry, and the person that the servant married to sometimes not necessarily is another servant, but usually is. However, whatever the person is married to, you're not entitled to that particular person, and their children is completely free. Not only free, you have to provide for them until they get the age, until they get to 21, for the servant. Basically, it is very expensive, but at the time it still has a value. Therefore, only the rich who can afford it can profit from this particular value, and they can do it. Let's wrap this up as time not on our side right now, but let's talk about economy. Why it is not right, why you cannot free slaves directly. Like, why not to do like how the West did? Do you think banning slavery from the get-go is good? I mean, it's good to ban slavery, and Islam was trying to do that, even servitude. But is it good? Like, it's good goal, but is it like what's gonna happen after that? Is it good not in itself, but overall, what's gonna do? I forgot to say that servantship or servitude is basically a lot similar to how the knight that takes oath to serve that particular master, but that one is by will, which did also happen. Also in Islam, it is better to be a servant than to be poor, regarded to be more honorable, and it saves your honor. It has benefit of really reducing unemployment to nothing and make everybody live decent lives. All scholars agree that servantship is only possible, only allowed when it is necessary, as we're gonna explain regarding the economy of back in the days, as well as when the enemy takes slaves, because all other forces around the world, they do take slaves when they win from the land. They take slaves, like straight up slaves, not even servants. So eye for an eye, Muslims do the same. There isn't like political agreement or something like now. Anyway, like even today, sometimes political agreement they get thrown out of the window. We saw a lot of that in World War I and World War II, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in World War III. Hopefully, it doesn't happen. Many people wanted to make themselves servants in a servantship contract. Because it is easier than being for free. Servantship contract would not make an economical sense in today's world. All the scholars and a command item of Islam itself, like the jurisprudence, says that if servantship is not necessary, then servantship would become prohibited, except if a person on his/her own full conscious choice wanted to be a servant to someone out of trust and love and respect. It was similar to a knight, but a bit different, of course. In terms of economics, it was hard to abolish slavery/servitude, especially when your enemies take slaves. We talked about that with influence from outside. There was almost continuous pressure and fighting, as there was no agreement between sides, and anything, if the enemy takes slaves, then the Muslim would do the same to them. Slavery, unfortunately, was very fundamental. That's in terms of economy directly, was very fundamental to all the economies before industrial age, just the same that there wasn't contraceptions. Basically, slavery at the time before industrial revolution and before the rise of the West was basically to the entire world the same, very fundamental to the same level, to the same extent as gas and oil and coal is to the modern world. Without it, everything would be shut down and everything would turn to dark, and even the slaves themselves would starve to death. If Islam straight away banned slavery, the economy of the western part of the world would collapse and all the people would starve to death, and the civilization as we know in the western part of the world would disappear. In brackets, I want to say that non-Muslims were not ruled by Islamic jurisprudence, only Muslims do. We need to understand history. The West only banned slavery because it no longer had an economical meaning, and that they can exploit workers better and more efficiently without overwork them. Slavery only changed its form, but it's still there. Plus, it's still about 50 million slaves worldwide. I think maybe like 27, something like that. Probably decreased. The West didn't ban slavery for humanitarian reasons, but for only money due to the new way of conducting business to an industrial revolution and low population size. Also, do you think slavery issues are solved yet? Islam encouraged to free servants. Many sins to wipe them clean. The first thing to do, if possible, is to consider is freeing a non-free human. Many were freed that way. However, due to war and the way warfare conducted, and that there is no agreement between government and slaves were taken. I hope people to be more well-rounded in history and not to focus on one particular subject. Please do. To summarize, as I said, it basically servitude, what remaining of slavery to economy is as crucial, as fundamental, as important as oil, coal and gas to the modern world. Without it, nothing will work. Everyone will starve to death. And I'm not joking, I mean it literally. Slavery just took a different form. Instead of slaving people with slaving machines, but slaving machines is not slavery, it's just a machine. But machines took the work of slaves. That's basically it. They did better, of course. That's what an industrial revolution is about. But that's the substitution that happened. As well as there's still elements of slavery or servitude remaining in the work environment to a great extent. Slavery and colonization, they just evolved. They didn't disappear really. So I want to mention that the production rate value of an individual that is not a servant is really low, and even the servants, their production value isn't really high. So but being a servant pushes you to produce much more value. It's not like today, guys. Okay, that's just the reality. Also, there was a lot of lazy people. Not lazy in sense of being like, lazy, you don't want to do anything, but lazy in sense of everybody want to be at the top. There's a lot of competition. Everybody wants to be a lord or something like that. Everybody wants to scale up the government positions, want to be a minister, stuff like that. Everybody want a high rank. Everybody want to do the real job, really, to be a merchant, to be a businessman, to be an owner of land. Nobody wants to work, really. This is like regarded to the free established individuals. The ones that are not free or not established individual will love to work, but even if they did work, their production value isn't high, and therefore they will be forced indirectly by this master to slightly work more to produce more value, and even that is not really enough. The production value is really low of an individual on average across history. The other thing is, it's really hard to be free, especially back in the days. Really hard. It requires a ton of skills, and you need to be fortunate with good family, even like good skilled family, and not everybody had that. So not everybody can afford being free. A lot of people would love to become servants. That's why there's people will buy themselves into a contract to become a servant to a master. Some wants the prestige, because sometimes if you like become a servant to a high-ranking minister or to a general, you get the prestige. You might become a commander within the general unit if you do good, if in the training. Like there's a potential there. There's like the Mamluk. The origin of the Mamluk that ruled Egypt are slaves, servants. They became kings. You know what I mean? That never happened in history except in Egypt, in Muslim Egypt, Muslim-controlled Egypt. So you can actually, if you play smart, jump ladders if you become servants, because things will become easier. A lot of people wanted to become servants, and as I said, Islam would prefer you to become a servant than to become poor. In that sense, if you like being really extremely poor, you better be a servant than being poor. In some cases, being a servant to a really famous and influential master, a lord, for example, a really respected lord, you get more respect than a free person. And sometimes people respect you in a high regard as a respect to your master, because they respect your master, so you get more additional respect through that. So even after you become free, you can still use your name as I was a master to that particular person, and you can establish business that way. You can establish friendships, and you can become friends with lords even that way, especially if you was doing particularly good to that particular master. In some cases, you're better being a servant than being free. Yeah, it's really that it is. And for instance, the Janissaries in Ottoman Empire, they sometimes hold more power than the Sultan. That's casual. It happened a few times. But usually they have almost as power as a sultan, or slightly less, even though they are the servant. But you are a servant of what? Of a sultan. So you give a respect of a sultan, because your will is the will of a sultan. It is not at all black and white by any means, and it is far more complicated and dynamic. Islam didn't ban slavery straight out of the gate, because it simply will collapse economy. It would require a revolution of a great size, similar to that happened in the Civil War, in the American Civil War, and you really don't want that. It's not really necessary. Islam took the slow grinding approach. One would like to introduce it slowly, but because it is the most sensitive, it took the longest time. Alcohol was prohibited as well, slowly, but it took few years. Step by step, in few years, alcohol was banned completely, like prohibited. A lot of stuff weren't prohibited from the get-go. It took some time during the Prophet Muhammad time. Islam likes to use this technique of slowly but surely, gradually introduce a particular concept, not from the get-go. And let's go to a civil war and have 500,000 people dead. No, calm down. That's not how we do it. That's it. Simply, that's not always works. What if? Imagine if the other side of United States Civil War won the Civil War. What's gonna happen? Slavery is gonna continue. what about the effort of the war? Well, slavery in brackets, as we said in the beginning, wasn't really the main cause of the main thing in the Civil War. But generally, if the Civil War was lost by the anti-slavery party, what's gonna happen? Slavery is gonna continue. You see what I mean? It could be tragic for nothing. So Islam didn't try to go that route. It's basically too risky. You know that one of the main causes of the first civil war in Arabian Peninsula during Muslim time, the first caliphate, is heavily related to taxes. Taxes caused a big cause of that civil war at the beginning. Imagine if they tried to ban slavery. Hell no. It is unpractical and suicidal at the time. It's a completely stupid idea. We need to understand the historical context of things and have a deep understanding. So please guys, always bear in mind the context. Well, a good way to summarize is that slavery back in the days used to be just as important and fundamental as oil, gas and coal is in the modern world, for the modern world. And because of that, Islam didn't ban slavery as it is necessary, as long as it stays necessary, and introduced to focus on servitude and give freedom unlimited and makes it as expensive as possible, and hinders it and make mechanisms of freeing servants instead of banning it completely and going through the long game of gradually grinding to stop it from existing. Peasants in medieval Europe weren't slaves, although they weren't extremely controlled. Not extremely controlled in sense of similar to that of communism, for example, and dictatorships. That's another example. But they were really controlled. However, the peasants really would like it that way. As I said, it's really hard to be completely free. Although also still most peasants are not servile. Our friend from History TV, Modern History TV covers that. So let's call it a day, and hopefully that corrects many conceptions and explains servantship/slavery in Islam and the Muslim world, and it is history in this particular part of the world. In brackets, there was some extreme slaveries here and there, but that's usually in sub-Sahara Africa, around Mali, and these type of outside influence of the main powers. And even during the Ottoman Empire, slave trade was minuscule and was indirectly connected with the Ottoman Empire. Many parts of sub-Sahara Africa was completely outside of the influence of the Ottomans. Extra. It's not really related to the main Muslim world, and was done illegally. It's outlawed, and it was done by external forces powerful in that particular region, by warlords who seeking power and money. So don't forget to do the YouTube stuff. Let's wrap it up. Subscribe, leave a like, of course comment below, and see you in the next video. Peace out. Assalamu alaikum.